Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I am Erin Summers. We are almost to draft week. Of course, it is next Thursday through Saturday, April 25th through 27th. The Saints are going to have a ton of coverage, so make sure you keep up with us, NewOrleansSaints.com, @Saints on X. We'll have interviews with all of the draft picks throughout the weekend. We're going to have a huge party at Manning's on day 3 of the draft. Make sure you mark it on your calendars, 12 to 3 at Manning's. We're going to have a ton of special guests. I'm hearing Arch himself is even going to show up. I will be there hanging out, hosting the festivities, and I really hope that a lot of you fans are going to come out and join us. It's going to be a really fun day. As for this week's podcast, we're going to take a look around the NFC South. We're going with the Atlanta Falcons today, and then we're going to hit the Carolina Panthers and the Tampa Bay Bucks. We're just trying to figure out what our division rivals are going to do. Give us a little edge on the competition, maybe on draft day, so we can kind of figure out how things are going to pan out around the Saints picks. And of course, what these teams are going to look like next season when we have to face them again. To give us an inside look at the Falcons, my friend Tori McElhaney joins us. She's a senior content producer for the Falcons. She's worked there for a long time. Prior to that, she covered the Falcons for The Athletic. She knows all of the ins and outs on that team and what they may look like under new quarterback Kirk Cousins, new head coach Raheem Morris. They're definitely going to be a different team this upcoming season, so we're going to ask her about that as well. Here's Tori now.
Tori, thank you so much for joining me on the New Orleans Saints podcast. I guess we can pretend to be friends, even though we are friends outside of this, but obviously rivalries. So we're going to put that aside as I want to just pick your brain about the Atlanta Falcons and their upcoming draft. But before we get to that, how are you as the draft is approaching?
So I'm feeling okay. It's been a lot. Going through a coaching search, a coaching change, getting new coordinators in here, obviously brand new quarterback that is supposed to come in and not fundamentally change the offense, but you kind of hope so if you're a Falcons fan. So this has been a truly jam-packed offseason, and I feel like we were just getting on a plane leaving New Orleans after week 18, and it's been nonstop ever since. Mm-hmm. I truly don't know if I've come up for air or felt like I could come up for air any time over the last few months, but the draft kind of, to me, symbolizes not an end, but at least kind of a closing of the offseason chapter. Because, the Falcons can still make moves beyond the draft and obviously contracts extensions or reworking contracts, restructures. But I think the bulk of big time decisions for the Falcons leading into 2024, kind of the draft is a nice bow. So that's at least how I'm looking at it. Maybe just to honestly keep myself sane, but we're fine. We're chugging right along.
It does feel like we're building up to this one weekend, and then after that we'll have a lot of decisions, pieces will be in place. But how much of that has changed with the new head coach and a new quarterback, and as you mentioned, the offense seemingly going to look different next year?
It's a good question because so much has changed. And because of the change, I said, I was like, okay, going into the 2024 offseason after Arthur Smith was let go, question 1A was who was going to be the head coach. Question 1B was who's going to be the starting quarterback. Well, now here we are, we're recording this on April 15th, and we have both of those answers. Raheem Morris is the head coach, Zach Robinson, offensive coordinator, Jimmy Lake, defensive coordinator, Kirk Cousins, your quarterback. And those were kind of the main topics of conversation surrounding the Falcons this offseason. And so now it does change what the Falcons are looking for, I think, in the draft and what they've been able to do, also getting 3 new receivers in the receiver room, because Drake London was honestly one of the only pass catchers from 2023 under contract in 2024. So you knew fundamentally you had to rebuild that room. Well, the Falcons were able to do that with speed, with Rondell Moore and Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod. So the wide receiver room looks a little bit different, but you still have your key pieces of Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts, that it's going to be interesting to see how all these things mesh together and how, honestly, the Falcons could, after spending as much money as they did in free agency with the Kirk Cousins deal and all those wide receivers that I just named, how much are they going to be looking at defensive guys in this draft, because they need more of a presence coming off the edge. They probably could use some more depth at cornerback. So all of these things are kind of floating around in the ecosphere, and I'm just kind of like, this is fun. We're having fun. Like, there's enough to talk about.
Well, for the last 3 seasons, the Falcons have gone offensive weapon with their first pick in the draft, as you mentioned, with Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson. So that side, yes, seems like they have a lot of weapons there. You add in Kirk Cousins. So do you feel like they are in the number 8 spot again for the 3rd year in a row? Do you think they will go defense?
Here's the thing. If I'm putting on my GM hat, I do go defense. And I mean, I can only say just my opinion. You know how this works. But like, I really do think that because of all the things that you've done offensively, I feel like this offense right now could go out tomorrow. You know, granted, if Kirk Cousins was cleared 110% from the Achilles tear, I think they could go out tomorrow and put a pretty dang good offensive game plan together based on what they have. And defensively, I'm not far from feeling that way about the defense either. That's why I mentioned, like, there are just a couple of key pieces that I think would really, really help solidify this defense, because this defensive unit, I think, outperformed what a lot of people thought they would last year. This was a really, really good defense, and you return almost all of those guys. And so you don't want to feel like there's a drop off. And if you can add more weapons to that side of the ball to kind of mimic and match what you have offensively, I mean, I tend to think that there's reason for Falcons fans to be hopeful about what has been put together, because they have spent the last the first 2 years of the Terry Fontenot, Arthur Smith regime in salary cap purgatory, where you couldn't really do anything because you didn't have the money to do things. And now you had enough leeway and enough room to feel like you have a really good, strong foundational base of a roster to go out and get a quarterback like Kirk Cousins.
At the owners' meetings, you mentioned Terry Fontenot. He and the new head coach, Raheem Morris, said that they're still wide open as far as who they will take or the position they will take. And they have had that mindset of they're going to take best available in the draft. That's usually what the Falcons do. Is it that wide open for them? Or you really think they're just going to see how things fall? There's going to be no trading up or down?
Here's the thing is, if I'm them, I am thinking long-term. And I'm thinking into 2025 and into 2026. I actually was just on a podcast earlier today where we were kind of talking about the different avenues that the Falcons have. And here's the thing. If the Falcons are dead set on let's draft an edge rusher or a cornerback, you can move down and realistically have one of the best edge rushers or the best cornerbacks available from 15 to 25. So if you feel confident in that, why would you not start thinking about what it could look like 2 years down the road, where realistically Kirk Cousins signed a 4-year deal, but it's not one of those things where you can just sit on your laurels and sit back and wait for Kirk Cousins' contract to expire. You have to be thinking about a succession plan now. And if you are actively doing that through the 2024 draft, where you're potentially picking up future first round picks, I kind of lean more towards that's not a terrible idea, especially given the nature of the possibility that there is this giant run on quarterbacks early. There is this run on receivers and offensive tackles. And then you're seeing these defensive guys falling farther and farther out of the top 10. If you're a team like the Falcons, or probably honestly even the Saints, that is very, I mean, you're sitting there like, if these teams want to go up and get these quarterbacks, let them.
Yeah, because then that, as you mentioned, allows other players who are very good to fall. There, it seems like it is a lot of talent in this draft at several different positions and positions of need, as you mentioned, for the Falcons and for the Saints. So that definitely bodes well. I have seen, however, some of the mock drafts say that the Falcons are going to trade up.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that too. I saw one recently. I think it was The Athletic, and he had the Falcons trading up for Marvin Harrison Jr. And that's intriguing. Like, I here's the thing: I'm not like saying that wouldn't happen. If I used to kind of be under the umbrella that the only way the Falcons would trade up is if they had a chance at any of those top 3 quarterbacks. But then after like they went out and got Kirk Cousins, like he's obviously QB1, that kind of flew out of my mind. But then this option of like, oh, well, you could move up and get one of the best, if not the best receivers in the draft class. That's intriguing. Do I see the Falcons doing that? I be more conservative in my like thoughts about the draft anyways. So personally, no. But it's fun to think about. Like, it's fun to think about the Falcons going 4 for 4 with these offensive weapons in the top 8 picks of the draft in 4 years. Like, that's wild.
And they've panned out. They have been great selections. So, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a fantastic weapon for wherever he does end up. When you look down maybe a little bit further in the draft, how likely do you think it is that the Falcons do draft a quarterback? Because yes, as you mentioned, Cousins is QB1, but thinking about depth, thinking about the future, do you think they're going to add somebody else?
I mean, that's the part of this piece of draft plans and future plans and long-term plans that it's more of a mystery. I actually feel like there's less mystery about like number 8 overall and more mystery about what the Falcons are going to do long-term at quarterback. And it's funny because that you asked this because I recently did a top 50 mock draft on our site, and I didn't do any trades, which obviously that's not realistic, but more and more, you know, you're hearing draft analysts talk about a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix Jr. They're like, we don't necessarily think that unless teams are absolutely greedy and feel like they have to go get this guy, that those guys could fall into the second round. Well, the Falcons have the 43rd overall pick, so they're pretty high up in that second round. And they also have 2 third-round picks that I wouldn't be opposed to packaging together to make some moves around there. And also maybe potentially getting into the bottom of the first round if they wanted to trade back into the first round. I do think the door is open for the Falcons to draft a quarterback. And it's because of exactly what I said, that you have to start thinking about a succession plan sooner rather than later. And you have seen success with other teams, namely the Chiefs, namely the Packers, that went out and drafted a quarterback and had him sit behind a veteran for a year or two. And these teams are, I mean, we could talk all day about like what they've done, what the Chiefs has done, especially. I mean, obviously Patrick Mahomes is one of one, but it's a recipe that you could try. And do I think the Falcons try it this year? If the right guy is there and it's not going to hurt them long term. And then I also think about the whole, what I was saying before too, about, okay, let's say you take the number 8 overall pick and you trade down and you acquire future draft capital. How can you package that in 2025 or 2026 to go and get one of the premium upper echelon quarterbacks in the draft? I mean, that to me is something that I'm like, that's interesting. I kind of don't mind that idea. I'm all about like getting future draft capital, but it's all about where the Falcons feel like they are, I think, that night and that weekend.
Yeah, you don't have to remind Saints fans about Jordan Love and Green Bay and how that's worked out, because that is definitely a sore spot from last season. We're gonna move on from that topic. You mentioned a couple other areas of need, obviously a pass rusher, cornerback. Anything else do you think that the Falcons do need in this next season to really solidify some areas?
Yeah, I would also like to see some depth be built in the interior of the defensive line. I know everybody's talking about edge rusher, but I mean, David Onyemata, who I know this fan base knows very, very well, he was so good for the Falcons last year, especially when Grady Jarrett suffered a season-ending knee injury. And to have Grady Jarrett back, that's obviously, I mean, Grady Jarrett's the heart and soul, I think, not only of this defense, but I think of this entire team. And so getting him back automatically helps out someone like David Onyemata and vice versa. When David came in, it automatically helped out Grady Jarrett. Now, I think you're talking about two men who are in the twilight years of their career. Doesn't mean that they're going to retire in the next 2 years, but it is something, again, as we're talking about succession plans, it is something that you have to think about. And so I really like the idea. I think there's a lot of really, really good defensive tackles that are going to be there in the second and third round because of what we're saying before, where it's like you're going to have a run on quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive tackles. So you have these really solid defensive tackles that could be there at 43 or in the 70s, according to where the Falcons ultimately end up, that I like the idea of being able to go get a young guy at defensive tackle who doesn't have to come in and play immediately because you have Grady Jarrett, you have David Onyemata, who you feel confident about. But being able to learn behind two of those guys who have been, I think, two of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFC South for a good while now, I think there's something to be said about that.
I've been looking at a couple different names as well. We've talked about positions, but obviously Bama's defensive end, Dallas Turner, is somebody that's probably going to be the first edge rusher taken. Right. He's popped up on a lot of mock drafts as going to the Falcons, but any other players that you've seen multiple times or heard of multiple times as fallen to the Falcons?
Yeah, so Dallas Turner obviously is number one. I feel like we do a mock draft roundup every week, and I feel like every single week we're just like, all right, put Dallas Turner on the cover photo because everybody's saying Dallas Turner. But I also really like Jared Verse. I also really like Quinyon Mitchell at corner. I like Terrion Arnold at corner. If the Falcons really go down into the bottom of the first round, I like Nate Wiggins. I think that there are, between edge rusher and cornerback, I feel like the Falcons they can kind of not get who they want to, but they have the opportunity that they can move around and really find someone that fits exactly what they're needing and what they're looking for. And I know, obviously, Terry Fontenot and this whole Falcons front office, they talk a lot about best player available. I think this opportunity of this 2024 draft class is that there's a chance, if you're the Falcons, that best player available and position of need meet head on at number 8. Let's just use that as an example. If that's the case, then best of both worlds, not to quote Hannah Montana, but like that's truly, like it really is. That's something that could really work in their favor. But those are kind of the 5 names that I tend to lean towards. And if the Falcons wouldn't have gone out and done the work that they did rebuilding and replenishing the wide receiver room, I would have said Rome Odunze. I really like him too. I think the Falcons probably would have really, really liked him if free agency went a different way. So
sure.
Some names. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. It's so much to keep track of, but I appreciate all the insight there. Since I have you, I have to ask, and in your conversations with the new head coach, Raheem Morris, what do you think that this offense is going to rely on in this upcoming season?
I think they have to rely on Kirk Cousins' accuracy. I think that they finally have a group of receivers that can really stretch the field. And I do think that being able to rely on a balanced offense is something that the Falcons have struggled to do in the past 3 years because there's been so much inconsistency at the quarterback position. Nothing against Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, but Kirk Cousins immediately plugs into this offense, and you feel better about his ability to hit Drake London downfield, to get the ball in Kyle Pitts' hands, to let Darnell Mooney or Ray McLeod or Rondale Moore stretch the field a little bit and get some explosives going, along with the fact that you still return Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. And let's not even get into the entire offensive line. That whole offensive line from 2023 is coming back together. That doesn't happen very often at all in this league. You know how it is. I mean, it's just like that there is a lot of potential for this offense to be explosive in a way that you hoped it would have been in the last 3 years, and it wasn't. So that's, I think, the goal at this point in time.
Yeah. Doesn't sound very fun for us next season. NFC South is going to look a little bit different than it has over the past few years. Who do you think is going to be the strongest team?
I mean, I think I have a hard time thinking about the Falcons now with a reliable quarterback not being up there. I mean, I think about the fact that the Bucs are returning Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, and they're gonna be a offense to look out for. I mean, you guys down in New Orleans, I mean, it's sad that I'm like anyone but the Panthers, but like you never know. The Panthers have done some work on their end too. I mean, that's the thing about the NFC South. It never actually, I think, ends up panning out exactly like what we think it will when we project it before the season starts. It's always something. And knowing this dang NFC South, it's going to be week 17 and we're still going to be like, who's going to win the NFC South?
Yeah. Have you gotten over that last game of the season yet?
No, mentally, physically, emotionally, no. I feel like the remnants of that like final game in New Orleans, I'm still, because I mean, that was like we flew back into Atlanta, and then everything with the coaching search happened it started within the next 12 hours. So I honestly feel like I never got off the plane. I never got off the plane.
You have been working really hard since that. I mean, the season is one thing and the off season is supposed to start, but that kind of kicked you into a nonstop off season. And I know it's going to kind of gear up again this next week as the draft actually takes place Thursday through Saturday. Are y'all doing anything special draft coverage wise?
Oh yeah, we have so much. I mean, we're kind of like all hands on deck. It's going to be really fun. We have photo sets, we have video sets. We'll be doing I'll be doing a first round feature with whoever they take in the first round and their families, which I'm really excited about. That'll probably run the Tuesday after the draft. And then I also work on this project. It's called Finding Falcons, which is I interview the assistant coaches who are now going to be the position coaches of these draft picks, and also the area scouts who have done all the legwork on essentially finding these guys. And it's something that I started. It's a project I started 2 years ago that has kind of become my draft baby. And there's always a story every single week after the draft that's kind of detailing how these draft picks got on the radar of the Falcons. So I'm really excited about that. But that's just kind of like a small smidgen of our entire team and what we're working on.
Yeah, I know with off-season workouts starting today, players are back in the buildings. There's just a lot going on, and it's going to be a fun time of this off season, leading up to the draft. So I appreciate all of your insight and everything that you shared, and we'll definitely check out our rival after the draft to see who you guys actually ended up with and who we have to look out for next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Appreciate all the insight from Tori. Great stuff. And of course, we're going to have to circle back, check out what the Falcons actually do to see what we're in store for as soon as September rolls around. Of course, we don't know the dates yet that we are going to see these opponents, but we know we will see the Falcons twice, and it is always an event. Thanks for tuning in, listening to a breakdown of the Falcons. We'll be back twice more this week with a look at the rest of the NFC South opponents.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.